What is up, YouTube fam? Robbie C here. We're out at George Ward Park and we just met some new friends, Jesse and Nicholas, who are actually out here playing their first ever round of disc golf. Love seeing new faces out here. They walked up and saw the camera and they were like, oh, you must take this pretty serious. No, but we do like to try to help people, so fun to see them. Got some celebration going on, and yeah, we're tickling some chains. It's a great time. So today we're gonna answer a hot button question that gets asked quite often, which is, when should you move on from fairway drivers? How far should you be throwing? What should things look like? Because, you know, we're all ready to throw the big stick. But before we dive in, of course, on honor of our friends we just met, we have to ask, Jesse or Nick, how are you doing today? Are you having a good one?
So catch me if I fall.
So how far should I be throwing if I want to be able to step up to throwing the fast disc, to throwing the big stick, to throwing oh so far? What should it look like? I could answer this question really fast and be like, that's the video, bang, bang. And some of you may appreciate that, but we're gonna elaborate just a little bit of an idea, lay a little bit of a foundation and a premise before we move on to fully answering that. And I'm gonna start with a very obvious caveat, which is, honestly, you can move on to the big distance driver whenever you want. Let's just go ahead and lay that groundwork, lay that foundation, because if you aren't throwing super fast discs or things like that, there is a lot of shot shaping opportunity that you may have with a faster disc right off the bat. So I don't think that it has to be some world of like, oh yeah, I throw X distance, achievement unlocked, now I have that. No, we're not playing Call of Duty here, we're playing disc golf. Nope. Didn't commit on that one. Too much ISA. For instance, here we've just thrown two mid-ranges and they've gone out in the road. But the beautiful part is I can step up here, I can grab a distance driver, and because it's a shorter hole and a shorter fairway, I can get a lot of easy work and shape movement out of this. Because of the fact that it's a driver, so I don't really have to throw it that hard, and it's gonna come out and it's gonna park right next to the basket. It's the overstability of it becomes reliable because in that throw, I didn't throw it hard enough to get it up to speed. And getting discs up to speed is how we get different flights out of them, but at the same time, we can get reliable flights when we know that's what this disc is gonna do every single time. For instance, I have this Calvin Halo Destroyer in my bag that is extremely overstable, and while I may have the arm speed to get certain destroyers up to speed if they're beat in, super overstable ones like this, I don't have the arm speed to get this to fly anything but just dumping out of the sky. So because of that, you may ask, Mr. YouTube man, why do you got a disc like that in your bag if it just does the same thing? Same concept. I know that it's reliably overstable and I know what it's going to do every time, so I can find some functions out of it. Factor 2 to consider on distance. We're talking about backhand or we're talking about forehand? Because honestly, there are lots of people who are able to generate more power on their forehand right off the bat. So because of that, they can move up to slightly faster discs. Also, most people's forehands have a lot of torque to them, so they're gonna need faster discs to have a little more torque resistance, especially if they're trying to go for power forehands left and right. If I were to say right now, I actually throw forehands farther than I throw backhands. And I'm hoping that's gonna change, especially with this video that I've been filming all month, and that as I continue to push through the off season, I hope that those numbers shift drastically because I'm putting in way more work on my backhand than I am my forehand. But I have discs like Renegon Destroyer as well as this AJ Destroyer that are pretty overstable, and I have very minimal business. This one's kind of on the line teetering, but this guy right here is so overstable that it's gonna fly extremely similar to my Calvin Destroyer that you just saw on the previous hole if I throw it on a backhand every time. However, I have enough power on my forehand that I can get a reliable fight out of this and even throw it on some sneaky flex lines and things like that. Whereas this race flies really well for me on a backhand, but on a forehand, because my forehand is advanced enough, I have to be a little touchy with it. I can't really yam into this or give it the beans as much because it's going to stand up and turn too much for what I may be looking for. So if you're like me and you have a much better forehand than you do, let's say, a distance backhand, then you may need to have distance drivers in the back. But let's talk about the beauty of fairway drivers and how wonderfully glorious fairway drivers can be. We're gonna grab an undertaker, a stalker, and a sting. We're gonna start with the most overstable here. That's not true. Let's start with the most understable. And we're gonna see what we can do on sending these. Now, something I'm working on right now is speeding up my hand and letting my body sort of naturally fall into position, but you're gonna hear a lot about that in the recap video at the end of the month. Fairway driver time. I need to miss that tree. It's not bad at all. Stood up, got there. Go more overstable with the undertaker. Okay, and let's go last but certainly not least, stalker. Man, stalker's so good. I'm gonna be recommending the stalker a lot lately. Ooh, that was deserved. Welcome to disc golf. You can't hype up a disc without shanking it. While I firmly believe that mid-ranges are the most overlooked section or set of molds in disc golf, fairway drivers might be the most clogged up or the most filled line in pretty much every manufacturer's lineup. In fact, I haven't looked this up to like fact check this before this video, but feel free, someone who's like super eager in the comments. I'd be willing to bet that most manufacturers, the section that they have the most in is fairway driver. Innova might be the exception, but that's because if you go on Innova's website, they count 9 speeds as distance drivers. I'll give you 10 speeds as like control driver, but a 9 speed as a distance driver does not feel like that is true at all. We're gonna try to ring these up with a putt and then a throw in. Boop, boop, boop. Nah. Okay, throw in. Drop. That would have been cool. But here's the thing about fairway drivers is that when we think about a fairway driver ranging from 6 all the way to 9, even 10, that is a large range in which there is a power threshold of injecting spin and power into the disc. That's what that speed number is. It does not directly translate to distance. That we can find a disc that works for a lot of players. And even if we don't look at that speed threshold, we can adjust the stability on the turn and fade, meaning the last 2 numbers, to find something that works for lots and lots of folks out there. Also, the power threshold of being able to throw a 5-speed or a 6 or 6.5 like a Crave is really not that much. But one thing fairway drivers do extremely well is that a fairway driver has much more of that bladed edge as opposed to a mid-range. When we look at these two side by side, you'll see the profile of this mid-range versus the fairway driver, and I hope that this translates to camera, that because this has that bladed edge to it, it definitely has a little more of an effect in teaching us about what nose up does to a disc. Putters and mid-ranges still can fly pretty well when the nose is up on them. The nose angle being how the disc is flying in relation to the line that I pull it on. So if I go really high and I swoop low like this, if my nose is up, it's gonna air bounce. And if my nose is down and I go boom, boom, it's gonna shoot straight into the ground. Fairway drivers are a great introduction to the more nose up we throw with a fairway driver, that bladed edge really that's designed to cut through the wind almost becomes a bigger glide or like sail to catch the wind. And now it's gathering so much, which takes a lot of speed off the disc. This is a reason that a lot of folks are gonna be throwing their fairway drivers and their mid-ranges and their putters and their distance drivers all about the same distance, is because 2 of those categories ride the wind very well, and 2 of those categories do not do well when they're forced to ride alongside the wind rather than cutting through it. So for beginners, most often I'm gonna recommend going with mid-ranges and putters to throw, but eventually moving on to fairway drivers can be a very valuable lesson and a very valuable tool that you need to look into. Because if we don't start figuring out how to use the nose angle of the disc to our advantage, and a lot of times people forget that like there are moments where throwing nose up actually does play advantageous to us. For instance, if I'm throwing uphill, I need the disc to get up there and install and then come back to the left or fade out or things like that. Throwing nose up in those situations can be super good because it can fight up and then the nose up takes over, boop, boop, fades out. Now, before we go much further, I want to take a quick moment to talk about, not really a sponsor, but a fun new project that I'm working on over with Jason at the warehouse, and that is our new podcast, Bards of the Board. If you are a board gamer at all, or you've ever been interested in getting into the hobby board gaming category, which is sort of that next step past your Risks and your Monopoly and things like that, or a game that you've probably heard of, Settlers of Catan, then we started a podcast that's just for you. Each episode, we're going to dive through a new game that we suggest to different board gamers out there, and we're going to rate it on our cookie scale, which is our grading scale for whether or not we think they fit well with beginners and where they land overall. You can find it on all the major podcast platforms, as well as over on YouTube at Bards of the Board, as each new episode drops on Thursdays every other week. We would love for you to check it out if you've ever been interested in that. I'm super grateful for your continued support on the projects that we're doing with the Robbie C channel and just kind of the Robbie C brand at all. I know there's a bunch of board gamers out there, so hope you guys will enjoy that pod. So there's a beauty to throwing fairway drivers, but how do we know when we take that next step? The first thing I would ask is, when you're throwing fairway drivers, are you getting different shot shapes out of them? For instance, I'm gonna throw 4 discs here. I've got 2 stings in this hand and I've got 2 stalkers in this hand. If we put the overstable version of each side by side, and then we have the understable version of each side by side, in an ideal world, I should be getting different flights out of these because they're both 7 speeds. Funny enough, I'm looking at this and realizing the stalker is 7.5 minus 1, 2, and the sting is 7.5 minus 2, 1. So the sting should have a little more turn to it, and I want to see, am I actually getting different flight out of what I want to throw? That sting is fairly new, and by fairly new, I mean this is literally my first round playing with it. We saw that we got turn out of it. Now let's see if we get turn out of this stalker. A little bit of turn, but honestly, just really straight, and that's fine. Now, with these more overstable versions, I would not expect to get a same flight, but that's ESP plastic compared to ESP plastic. Let's see how Z plastic compares to Z plastic. Man, I hate that tree so much. It is the bane of the turnover on this hole. The stalker, I got this one when I was up at Foundation, not last trip, but the trip before in July. Still haven't thrown it that much, so I hear this is gonna beat in, but right now it has some nice stableness to it, so. Yeah, you can see. All right. So we had 4 different throws there and 4 different flights. Because of this, if I'm getting different flights out of different discs, especially same mold but different plastics, that means I'm injecting enough power and spin into the disc to allow the Frisbee to do what it wants to do. If they were all doing the same exact thing and fading out, then that means at that number or whatever number threshold I'm at, I probably should take a step down till I'm seeing different movement out of the different discs. So what do I think the number is that, hey, if you're throwing X amount of distance, you need to switch to distance drivers, whatever it may be, because I feel like I have to land on a number. And I want to preface this with, when I look at pros, especially touring pros, such as Brody, who is not necessarily known for being like the biggest distance thrower in the world, I've seen Brody throw a mid-range 400 feet. So you have to understand that, man, that guy can really throw it. You have a guy like Hunter over at Foundation who throws a hex 400 feet. So yeah, those people definitely ready to throw distance drivers. And that's how you can see them get different flights out of distance drivers. With that being said, I know touring pros are throwing fairways over 400 feet, but I don't think that you have to be throwing fairways 400 feet. So my final answer, 330 feet, or I think that should come out to like 110-ish meters. If you're not throwing fairway drivers at least that far, then while you can throw distance drivers and you can get a flight out of them, like we opened up this video saying, I think that you're not gonna see that much of a distance increase. And in fact, what's gonna probably end up happening is, not only will throwing distance drivers, if you're throwing less than that with your fairways, add less distance, but also you're gonna bring in greater calamity options, because those bigger rims and whatnot are going to be a little more squirrely. So if you throw a distance driver nose up, it has more opportunity to dash off to the left, dash off to the right, whatever it may be, and get a little further off where you wanted it to be because of both the bigger rim and the flatter edge. Rolling. But once again, at the end of the day, you got to decide what's going to work best for you, whether that is distance drivers, fairway drivers. You're supposed to have fun with this, so have fun with it. Let's grab the 2 here. Oh, I liked it. Just needed to start it a little further right. I'd be very curious for those of you who are watching to let me know what do you think about the 330 foot limit or the 330 foot idea. Is that a number you agree with? Do you think it should be longer? Do you think it'd be shorter? What are some of your fairways that you would recommend people work around and play around with before moving on to distance drivers? Be very curious. All those thoughts. As always, we'll make the comment section down below a resource for everyone to utilize and maximize. So thank you so much for your added comments that are come not only on this video, but over at Bards of the Board as well. So I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Please make it fantastic for someone else too. But for now, we're going to leave you with the birdie.